Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Many thanks for joining our last webinar in the Publishing Best Practices series. My name is Nargiza Latke, and I'm the lead for local capacity development cross-cutting team within the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Livestock Systems at the University of Florida. This series is presented by the Innovation Lab for Livestock Systems and the University of Florida Libraries. Today's webinar is about doing strategies for increasing writing productivity. In this session, we will discuss about writing accountability concept and groups you can join that can help you get started. We will also learn about other strategies to improve writing productivity. Next slide, please.
Buttons aren't working. There we go.
Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce you to one and only speaker of this series, Dr. Terry Katz-Self. She's an experienced clinical investigator with specific expertise in the planning and execution of clinical trials involving mind-body therapies for chronic conditions related to aging and stress. Dr. Self received her Doctor of Chiropractic degree from Palmer College of Chiropractic and a PhD in Educational Research from the University of Virginia. She also completed an NIH-funded postdoctoral fellowship in clinical research at the University of Virginia Center for Study of Complementary and Alternative Therapies. Dr. Self currently serves as a translational research and impact librarian at the University of Florida. Before we start, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping points. This webinar will go for about an hour. Please keep your microphones mute during Dr. Self's presentation. You are welcome to write your name, institution you are from, and your email in the chat box. The recording of these and other webinars in this series will be available soon on the Livestock Labs website. And I will drop the link to the website shortly in the chat box. At the end of Dr. Self's presentation, we will have a question and answer session. Therefore, as you listen through this presentation and have questions and comments, please leave them in the chat and we will address them at the end. Now I'm giving Dr. Self the floor to continue with the presentation.
Thanks, Nargiza. So just briefly, kind of an overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to be talking about basically writing a manuscript to be submitted to a peer-reviewed journal and some steps along the way. So everything from choosing a journal, identifying a reporting standard if one is available, referring back to anything that you might have previously written on the study, and then we will end looking at something that's called a writing accountability group. And we'll talk about what that is and why that might be helpful. So we're going to get right into it. So one way to make sure your writing time will be productive is to identify which journal you're going to be submitting your manuscript to and know their requirements before you start writing. As mentioned in a previous session, I forget which one, I think it might have been session 5, a good method for choosing a journal is to just search a database to see what journals publish articles similar to the one that you'll be writing. And in this example, we'd looked at the dimensions database and just did a search for articles on the topic of livestock. And then you can look at, here's just the short list of journals that had published those articles. And in the case of this particular database, you could drill down farther and look at the analytical views to get the complete list of journals that have published on that topic. So just one method of helping you decide what journal you want to publish in, or at least generate a list to get started. And then once you've got some titles to consider, you need to go to the journal homepage and double check that they actually publish articles on that subject matter and that they accept the type of article that you're writing. And you'll want to look at their author guidelines, often called something either like instructions for authors, something along those lines. That's where you're going to find their particular formatting requirements. So if there's a word count, a restriction on the number of tables or figures that you can use, you want to be familiar with that before you start writing. It's not really a productive use of your time to write a manuscript and submit it to a journal that is just going to reject it because it's outside of their scope, or you drafted a 10,000 word manuscript for a journal that has a word limit of 3,000 words. And then you've got to go back and spend a lot of time making revisions when it would have been more time efficient to know what the expectation was and write for that in mind. Also, as I've pointed out previously, but bears repeating here, is that some journals require that you complete a reporting checklist that needs to be submitted along with the manuscript. So again, you want to know that in advance so you know you can find the checklist. Sometimes they usually refer you to like an established reporting guideline, but I've seen some where they kind of have their own checklist of items that you need to address. So again, if that's the case, you want to know what those items are before you start drafting the manuscript. And even if your desired journal doesn't have this type of requirement, I still highly recommend using a checklist when you're drafting your manuscript, because it can help you with the overall structure of your article. And it also can guide you in choosing what content to include and where it belongs in the article. You can also use the checklist when you're setting writing goals for yourself. And we'll look at an example of what I'm talking about in a few slides. I'll kind of flesh that thought out a little more. And then just as a quick reminder, a couple of good sources for finding reporting guidelines are Meridian and the Equator Network. And just briefly, an example of what a typical reporting checklist looks like. This is the Reflect checklist that we've referred to in previous sessions, and we'll dive into a little more deeply in this. Here, I just wanted to, if you weren't familiar with when I'm talking about a reporting guideline or checklist, just wanted to let you see what I'm talking about. So this is pretty standard. You can see they've got it arranged by the commonly used IMRAD structure, the introduction, methods, results, and discussion that you see in many papers. So in this case, one item on the introduction, then multiple items for the methods section, which continues onto the next slide. And then what should be reported in the results section. And then finally, the items that belong in the discussion section. And this particular checklist has a total of 22 items. As I say, we'll look at this again in a bit. This, I just left these in here just to show that the checklist is available in French, and I've provided the URL for that in the slide deck. And here's an example of a journal recommendation. This one from the Journal of Dairy Science. And in their case, they, as I recall, they require, yes, submission of a reporting checklist is required. And then they give you some links to suggested checklists that might be relevant for your study. And then one of the things they pointed out was Meridian, and this is the Meridian site. Again, a good resource for checklists. These are specific to studies that involve animals. There is a larger source called the Equator Network, and it covers a much wider variety of study types. They currently have over 600 reporting guidelines. And you can see one of the main study types they include right on their front page is animal preclinical studies. And the guideline for that is ARRIVE. However, they also allow you to easily find other guidelines just by using the search function. As for the writing process itself, setting aside time that you can dedicate to writing can be really helpful. It doesn't necessarily have to be a huge block of time. Designating short time blocks that you can more easily stick to can help you to form a consistent habit, which may be more productive in the long run than relying on binge writing sessions whenever you can manage to fit them into an already full schedule. I suggest, if possible, that you schedule your writing time when, like in a time like when you're going to have some free time afterwards, so that if you've gotten into the flow during your writing session, you can extend it a bit without having to shut down when things are flowing well because you've got to be in another Zoom meeting in 3 minutes. Oh, I realize that's not always possible, but it it does come in handy. Also, when you're scheduling a writing time, choose a time and a place when you're not likely to be interrupted. One example that that I find um, is a good time to do that is early in the morning before anyone else is in the office. I find it's easier to find quiet time, at least for me, early in the morning. So I thought I would share that. During your writing time, put your phone in do not disturb mode, or even better, turn it off. Disable any notifications on your computer, like close down your email program if you need to, and any programs that might distract you. Another point I want to make when I'm talking about scheduling writing time, that I'm not specifically talking about uh, putting words on paper necessarily. The the time spent during that designated writing time can involve anything that gets you closer to getting the article published, whether that's actually composing a section of the manuscript or creating an outline, or even things like reading articles that that inform what you're going to be writing and that you're going to be citing in your paper. So under this dedicated writing time, I'm I'm thinking in terms of anything that is furthering the cause of completing the article. And one other point is when you're setting goals for what you want to achieve, make sure that they're realistic. Um, you want to come away from your writing sessions feeling like you've been productive and it's been a good experience, and something you want to return to, not something that you dread when you see it on your calendar. Okay, so this is as promised, revisiting this reporting checklist. And here I just want to use it as an example of what I was talking about. Um, it can be really helpful when you are setting realistic goals. it's laid out so you can see all of the items that you need to cover and the sections they fall under. So you can kind of help this gauge what you can accomplish in the time that you have set aside for writing. For example, the methods section here includes items 3 through 12. And you can look at those items and decide whether drafting the whole method section is a reasonable goal for your writing session, or if selecting specific items would be more realistic. As another example, using this for guidance when setting goals for the results section. The results section might, as a whole, might seem overwhelming, but constructing the baseline data table might be a manageable goal that gets you moving forward. The checklist might also help you think about how you want to present the data, what items in results might work well as tables or figures, and where you're going to be more text heavy. And again, that can help you when you're thinking about what I can accomplish in a given time period. And again, just included in the slide deck, the same checklist, but the French version. Some of the content that you need to cover may have already been included in something you wrote previously. If you wrote a grant proposal or a study protocol for the study, you likely have text that you can copy and paste from that into your manuscript draft. And you'll need to revise it, but it can certainly serve as a good starting point. Even if you've delivered a presentation on the study, you can likely use bullet points from that as an outline for the manuscript. Bear in mind, if any of those materials were previously published, you cannot reuse the text verbatim. For one thing, it can be considered self-plagiarism, which we discussed in a previous session. And for another, if there are tables or figures that were previously published, the journal may hold the copyright to that content, and you would need to get their permission to reuse them. Another point I want to make is that you can often start the writing process before the study is completed. The methods section can actually be quicker to write early along as opposed to waiting until all of the data has been collected and analyzed. Just from personal experience, I found that by then, I tend to need to go back and refresh my memory about some of the details about the methods. And that's particularly true if I've been involved in other studies during that time. So for me, drafting the methods while I'm engaged in conducting the study um, has been more time efficient. Obviously, you can't complete the results section until you've got all of the data and the analysis has been prepared. But you might have, I mean, there are like common tables that occur in different study designs. Um, for example, one of the types of tables that like has appeared in almost every article I've written reporting study findings is like a baseline data table. So that is something, the table template is something that could be prepared in advance. I wouldn't have to wait until I had all of the data ready to enter that. I can at least know what I want it to look like in the manuscript. And then some of the discussion might might be doable in advance. You likely already know the similar studies that you're going to be comparing your results to. So you could summarize the findings of those studies and then just work in how your findings compare. And you will often see the abstract talked about first, like in the reporting checklists. Um, Abstract is sometimes like the first or second item, but the abstract, the advice that I've read is that it's typically best to write the abstract last. Um, and I have found that to be a more effective use of my time as well. Um, so just some potential helpful tips to get you started writing and be as time efficient and productive as possible. Some people find that meeting regularly with a small group of peers, each of whom have their own writing project going on, can be helpful. Studies have shown that faculty who participated in what they're calling writing accountability groups or WAGs increase the number of articles per year. These WAGs are focused on the process of writing as opposed to getting into the content. The group members each set their own goals and then report them to the group. Sometimes knowing that you're going to be reporting on your progress to others can help you to prioritize writing that you might have let slide otherwise. And this may be particularly helpful for manuscripts that do not have an external deadline. I find it's pretty common when there's like, there's a grant deadline looming, or a poster abstract deadline. Somehow or other, those get done on time. The ones I struggle with, and it's not just me, the ones we tend to struggle with are the ones that, okay, it's a journal article. I know I need to write this, but it doesn't have a deadline. And I've got these 10 other things that do have deadlines. So they get put on the top of the to-do list. So this is where, if you're part of a writing accountability group and you know you're going to be meeting and reporting on, this is the goal I set for myself and I accomplished it or I didn't, that can kind of serve, it's a self-imposed deadline, but one that you're going to be reporting to others. And that may help to push it or keep it toward the top of your to-do list. So the WAGs typically meet weekly, and the meetings can be in person or virtual. The format can vary, but generally each group member will set their own goal for the week and they report that goal to the group, and also report on, at the following meeting, they will then be reporting on what progress they made toward their goal. To be the most effective, the goals should be specific, measurable, achievable, and realistic. For example, set a number of words you want to write, or specific checklist items that you want to complete. And many, possibly most of the WAGs include a block of time for writing independently during the meeting. And I'm going to show you some examples of different writing group formats here shortly. Some other things to consider if you want to set up a WAG are how long, how long you want each session to be, whether it's an hour or 30 minutes, whatever the case may be, but also how long the WAG itself will last. Is this going to be, in some cases, they set them up to last, from the start of the semester to the end of the semester. Or they may have a certain number of weeks they want to set it up. Some, just once they form, it's just kind of a rolling group, and there is no end date that is planned. Some of the groups require members to commit to attend a minimum number of meetings. One example was that members had to commit to attending at least 7 of the 10 meetings. There's some debate about um, who all should be in the group. Um, some suggest restricting the membership to people at a similar career stage. So, for example, have like senior professors in one group and have a separate group for graduate students. And part of that is if you're mixing those groups together, um, sometimes the senior it turns into a teaching session instead of a writing session for the senior professors. And the graduate students can sometimes feel intimidated um, and maybe less likely to like ask questions and things um, if their professor is in the group. Another consideration is whether you want to restrict the membership to people that are working on similar items. So, for example, do you want all members to be working on grant proposals or maybe a group of people that are drafting a manuscript for submission to a peer-reviewed journal? You also want to decide whether you want to be tracking everyone's goals and their progress on their goals, kind of as a group, and if so, what kind of shared document you would use for that, or if you're just gonna, if it's gonna be enough for people to just like verbally report on what they did. Um, and be responsible for their own tracking. And some of the groups, I've seen them referred as writing support groups. They they actually go a step further and critique each other's work. I've also seen them referred to as feedback groups. So I mention them here just so you know they exist. If that's something that would be of interest to you, you could look into that, but that is not going to, we're going to be focusing on the more typical writing accountability groups. So as I said, I show you some examples of these. So the first one, this one is the most basic. And this, according to Sylvia, um, accountability is all that most group members need. So in this case, they don't have a writing component built in. They focus just on the goals and accountability. Um, so they they meet like once a week, but the meetings are only around 20 minutes because they're just reporting on, you know, this was the goal, this is what I achieved, and this is my goal for next week. In this case, they met sometimes on campus, but they were using a nearby coffee shop as a meeting place. And I've already talked about their format. They stated their goals that they'd set last week. They reported whether they met them, and then they set the goals for next week. So, and I think they had limited it to, I think it was like 4 to 6 people. So they could get that done in 20 minutes easily. Another example, in this case, they included writing time. So their meetings once a week, but now these were 60 minutes because they're including writing time. Their location was a college conference room. This actually started before the pandemic. So during the pandemic, they switched from in-person to virtual meetings. And their format was kind of a 15-minute, 30-minute, 15. So the first 10 to 15 minutes, they were reviewing their goals and the progress, and then setting goals for their little writing time block during the session. And here they would often talk about barriers to writing and brainstorm productivity strategies. Then they'd have 30 to 40 minutes of silent writing time. And then they'd finish out with 10 to 15 minutes where they report whether they met their writing time goal and then state what their goal was for the upcoming week. And then the third example, again, they included time to write. They met once a week, in this case, 90 minutes. And these were in person or virtual. Their format, the first 30 minutes was talking about goals and progress on those goals, challenges, strategies, that kind of thing. And they set the whole last hour of their meeting as silent writing time. And in this case, for many members, this might be the only time that they had to write all week. So they put more priority on that silent writing time. So different ways to approach it. Hopefully, one of these speaks to you and you think it would be useful. And then some things, just some items that I want to open up for discussion is if you have found anything that helps you be productive with writing, if you could share those tips with the group. Any challenges that you've encountered and strategies that you've used to overcome them. If you've had any experience with WAGs, I'd love to hear what that experience was and what worked for you, what you would do differently. And if any of you have interest in exploring a WAG in the future, this is a time when you could brainstorm with others what this might look like. So I think I do have a recap slide. And I do have the resources. And we've got the Q&A slide, but I'm thinking, so I'll leave it here for a minute to see if we have any Q&A already in the discussion. But I'm thinking we might go back to that kind of topics for discussion slide if we want to explore that.
Thank you, Terry. There are no questions or comments in the chat. So I would suggest maybe going back and
okay.
More details.
Yeah, so I've kind of shared some of my personal experience as I went along with like time of day that is more conducive to finding quiet time, and when different like for example the methods, it's better for me to write the methods early in the process rather than later. But I would love to hear what types of tips others might have.
I encourage those who would like to share to unmute their mics and share the strategies that work for you in writing and publishing your research. Anyone who would like to share? We have a lot of researchers on this in this session. Anyone? We also have students in this session. And if students have any strategies that they have observed from their mentors, from advisors in their academic units, please share with us.
And I'm also thinking there might be the potential, if any of you are interested in forming a WAG, if there are other people in the Zoom that you might want to connect with to try to do a virtual WAG.
Yeah, this actually would be a very good example, given that a lot of research is now taking place internationally across the borders. I may be sitting, me and Terry may be sitting at the University of Florida and working with our collaborators in Burkina Faso or Niger or Rwanda, Nepal, and the writing groups arranged around this cross-border may require some additional tips to make it work. Take into account the time difference, the language issues, the writing styles. Terry, while we're waiting on ideas to share from the audience, what have been your experience working with WIGs, especially when it comes to different writing styles?
Yeah, and that I haven't personally been involved in a WAG. From my readings, my take on it is that I can see one of the authors who made the point about mixing professors and students um, can be problematic, just because people tend to kind of, it can turn into a seminar by the professor, which is not the intention of the WAG, but it's easy to just fall into kind of our established roles. So I, for myself, I think I would be looking for one where it was other faculty members, um, and probably if I had enough colleagues interested that were also doing a manuscript for a journal, that would be my preference, because that's, again, this is speaking from personal experience. That's the thing I struggle with most, because there isn't an external deadline. So those always seem to end up at the bottom of my pile, and things like other things that I have a deadline for get done, and things that are actually deadlines for other people. I do those before I get to the things that I need to do for myself that don't have a firm outside deadline. So that would be the thing that would serve me best, I think, is being in a WAG where I was working on completing those manuscripts. And one step beyond that would be, even if you had, which might translate well to like a center where it's a center full of researchers. You're all doing the same kind of research. Um, the types of articles you're generating, it's the same study design, so you're all using the same reporting guideline. You're all familiar with the checklist and the items on the checklist. So I think that would be the ideal situation, but not necessary. You can have more mixed groups. And some of that, I think, is also going to be based on your personality and what works best for you. Another thing, the main goal should be on like the writing accountability part of it, but they have found that the groups are also helpful in people finding, like, you're talking about what you're doing, and other people hear about it, and sometimes that can lead to future collaborations. um, so if you were thinking that that is a potential useful side effect of the group, then I would include that possibility when I'm shaping the membership of the group.
Thank you, Terry. Any questions from the audience? Anyone who is interested to start the writing accountability group with their peers or students, please unmute and speak. We really would like to learn from you and hear from you what strategies you are using to improve your productivity and get that work out.
Let me point out, yes, this one. if any of you are thinking about setting up a WAG, so I referenced on the bottom of each slide of the examples, I referenced which source that information came from. So if you wanted to, use their format as a template, you know which article to look at. But generally speaking, I highly recommend this, the third article in the list here, Faculty Writing Accountability Groups, a protocol for traditional and virtual settings. This one has a really nice, in addition to talking about the one particular group, they have a really nice, they did a nice review of what is out there. So they've got a really nice table that lays out many different groups and what they looked like. So I highly recommend that resource in particular if you're trying to figure out what you're going to make a group and you want to know what it's going to look like.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We are approaching to the end of this webinar, and this webinar series. Thank you very much for joining us. Information on webinar recordings and copy of the slides, both in English and French, will be available soon, and we will make sure you receive this information. We will be putting a new webinar series in the new year, and we might reach out to you to explore what topics you would like to hear. I would like, again, to take an opportunity to thank Terry and University of Florida George F. Mathers Libraries for collaborating and providing these wonderful series on best practices for publishing your work. Thank you, Terry. We are good to go. Thank you, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank
See you
you.
later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.